before bed, I make sure there are no dishes in the sink. The counters are wiped down. The most obvious clutter is sorted. I make sure I know where the kids' lunch boxes landed so I don't have to search for them tomorrow. I go upstairs and straighten up the bathroom vanity just a bit. I pick up the laundry my kids have thrown on the floor. I set my alarm clock. These are tiny gifts to future me. Small acts of kindness done by a tired, possibly even grumpy person in service to another, also tired person who will exist tomorrow, so that the future version of me wakes up with a little more spaciousness and calm to start her day. It feels good when I've been kind to me. The theme Rabbi Elliot and I chose for this year is kindness, as you've heard, because we have felt so much that our world needs a lot more of it. Because Judaism provides rich and deep teachings about the virtue of kindness, as well as so many opportunities to enact kindness in the world by performing mitzvot and working on our own soul traits. We could all be kinder to others. There is always room for improvement. And I try really hard each day to remember that I'm able to exist and to function in large part because of the kindnesses done to me by others. People who have cared for me physically, emotionally, spiritually, from infancy until now. It's easy to take this truth for granted. We have received so much kindness from others, even if we've also received other things from others. But also, we could be a lot kinder to ourselves. And paradoxically, our ability to grow in this season of tshuva, of repentance, rests in part on how kind and compassionate we are able to be with ourselves. I would suggest that our liturgy today holds two ideas in tension. First, we've missed the mark so profoundly, and we need help finding a way back to the right path because it is so difficult to do the right thing. And on the other hand, we are not inherently sinful beings. We're essentially good. And the path back could not be more straightforward because the universe is built on a foundation of compassion and kindness. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we repeat the words, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, right over there. Adonai, Adonai, God gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and truth. Although on this Yom Kippur, we are going to save those words until the very end, until Ne'ilah, because it's Shabbat. The tradition ascribes two related qualities to God. God has chesed, loving kindness, so perfectly. Talia, thank you for putting it exactly like that. Maybe God is the only one who has loving kindness, which our tradition understands as a free-flowing, infinite source of kindness, without which the very existence of the universe would be in danger. Chesed has an additional meaning of faithfulness or loyalty. God is faithful to us. And then the other term is rachamim, compassion, related to the word rechem, womb. Compassion is kindness amped up with an even greater degree of empathy. Compassion is like the kindness or love of a parent for a child. Pirkei Avot, the ancient rabbinic life manual, has this to offer. Rabbi Shimon said, "Be careful, be scrupulous with your prayer. And when you pray, do not make your prayers routine, but a plea for compassion and kindness from God. For it is said, God is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in kindness," etc., etc. And finally, do not judge yourself to be a wicked person. Rabbi Shimon teaches that prayer, at its core, is a reminder to the self that we have access to infinite care, kindness, and compassion. We should be careful and diligent in prayer precisely because it serves as that kind of reminder. In Jewish tradition, that infinite kindness is our Creator, and we are made in the image of the Creator. We're capable of acting out of good impulses and acting out of bad impulses, but we are not essentially wicked. We are essentially kind. And if we're not essentially wicked, if we can see ourselves as created in the image of God, then we're capable of returning to the right path and being welcomed back with compassion. Read this way, Rabbi Shimon is prescribing prayer as an inoculation against the inner voice that says we are not capable of change, against defeatism and against low self-worth. The words of prayer themselves might function this way, serve as an inoculation for some people, just the words, but perhaps not for lots of us. And I would suggest that any of us who engage in regular prayer or regular meditation might just resonate with the idea that prayer helps us connect to self-compassion no matter what the words are. For me, the way that prayer and meditation do this is by helping me feel a little less ego, a little less in control. Prayer, especially as a regular practice, helps to ease the distinctions between you and me, between us and everyone else, between humanity and everything that exists. In prayer, I connect to an infinite source of care, kindness, and compassion, of which I am just a little but fully worthy part. That might not resonate for lots of you. But if that doesn't resonate, I invite you to try a little prayer and meditation. It's a good thing to do. Okay, if it doesn't resonate for you though, let's get to the nuts and bolts of self-compassion. So what gets in the way of being kind to ourselves? When it comes to the little kindnesses I can do for myself before bedtime, the only barriers are how much energy do I have, how much time do I have, am I distracted by email, am I distracted by the laundry that needs folding? But when it comes to really being kind to ourselves, when it comes to believing that we are worthy of care and capable of change, what gets in the way? Often it's a sense of shame. Shame prevents us from kindness and compassion to ourselves. And it's funny because Yom Kippur can feel like a holiday that primes us for shame. But guilt is different than shame. Guilt is, I made a mistake. Shame is, I am a mistake. Yom Kippur should wake us up to guilt, but not to shame. As Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky writes, guilt is a distressful sensation resulting from the awareness that one has done something wrong. Shame, on the other hand, is a sensation that one is somehow wrong themselves. Guilt and shame are different in their orientations. Guilt is a sign of empathy toward others. I know my actions hurt another. I can put myself in their shoes. I have an interest in acting for the good of others. But shame is focused inward, on how we are blameworthy and feeling awful, and not on the impact of our behavior on others. Shame is a fundamentally unkind stance. It keeps us both from the compassion we need to empathize with the other, and also the compassion for ourselves to trust that we can change. Contemporary psychology affirms this understanding. People who are more prone to self-compassion and more prone to less prone to shame, I should say, have an easier time avoiding future moral transgressions. Kindness and compassion toward the self, born out of a sense of self-worth, is a key ingredient to self-improvement. So we know that being stuck in shame doesn't help us change, but that doesn't make it any easier to work through. Shame is a universal human emotion, encoded in our DNA, built into the functioning of human societies. It appears even in our earliest creation stories. Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, and then suddenly they realized they were naked, and they were shamed. They rushed to clothe themselves because they had discovered that feeling of shame. In fact, shame can be necessary, a temporary push toward good behavior. Have you ever wondered about somebody, have they no shame? A little shame can help the world go round, but anything more than just a little gets in the way of being our best selves. And shame can also come from being exposed to shaming messages about ourselves. Maybe those messages came from parents, or schoolyard bullies, or lovers, or advertising, but we absorb them nonetheless, and they too often become our inner voice, repeated over and over and over again to ourselves. Perhaps we can't eliminate shame, but when shame gets in the way of self-compassion, we can inoculate ourselves against it. We can remind ourselves of Rabbi Shimon's teaching. Remember, do not judge yourself from a place of shame. You are not a wicked person. Remember, you were created with compassion and kindness. And if you were created with compassion and kindness, you are a person who is worthy of compassion and kindness, even from yourself. Sociologist and philosopher Erich Fromm writes, "It is a virtue to love my neighbor as a human being. If it is a virtue to love my neighbor as a human being, it must be a virtue to love myself, since I am a human being too. There's no concept of humanity in which I myself am not included. The biblical love your neighbor as yourself implies that love for one's own self cannot be separated from love and understanding for another individual. The love for my own self is inseparably connected with love for any other being." Some would argue that loving your neighbor as yourself requires that you love yourself. That's actually not how our tradition has tended to interpret this commandment. Instead, we've reinterpreted it in the negative. What is hateful to you, do not do to others. Or we reinterpret it as theoretical. If this action feels loving to you, that's what you should do for another. Or we've parsed the logistics of loving. These specific actions are loving, do that. But the verse implies beyond that, if we are capable of loving, if we're capable of being kind, if we're capable of showing care to our neighbor, to our friend, to our family member, then we are capable of being loving, kind, and caring to ourselves. And we might parse that commandment, you shall love the neighbor as yourself, into two separate commands, each a separate task. Love your neighbor, love yourself. Anne Lamott, author and spiritual teacher, writes about mercy, which she defines as radical kindness. She says, probably the most radical part of it all is that it begins with kindness to yourself in the same measure with which you would be very, very kind to others. Automatically, we are warm and friendly to other people, and yet with ourselves, we tend to be harsh, and we tend to be easily exasperated with ourselves. The flip side of seeing ourselves as not wicked is to see ourselves as worthy of love, kindness, compassion, and mercy. And we are so worthy of mercy, both from ourselves and from others. So much of what goes wrong in our lives and so much of what goes right in our lives is entirely out of our control. It's our nature to take the blame, to feel at fault. It's also our nature to take credit far more often than we really deserve. Compassion could be understood as recognizing the suffering in others and doing what we can to alleviate that suffering. Self-compassion is an understanding that we are suffering too, and that we are worthy of relief from that suffering. We can know that we're worthy of our own compassion precisely because we know how to feel awful for the things that have gone wrong, where we played a part in their going wrong. And the kindness that we can do for ourselves today, of all days, is to atone for the part that we played, to commit to trying better, and with compassion, to let it go. Gemar Chatima Tova, may we be sealed for a good and kind year in the year to come.